In the decades I've been playing video games, one of the most powerful story themes to emerge is one of self-forgiveness. These often involve the main character prodding deep into their past, coming into conflict with the worst part of themselves, trying to discover some new version of peace. In some instances, this redemption is achieved, solidifying a new chapter for the character, a path forward, and in others it's fumbled, showing clear signs of someone doing their best but ultimately failing, or maybe a person who realizes they don't want to forgive themselves at all. My two favorite examples of successful self-forgiveness arcs couldn't be more different, one in a retro RPG style with zero voice acting or mocaps, and the other with a budget that couldn't be higher. Yet putting them side by side highlights interesting things about both. In this video, I want to examine how both OMORI and God of War achieve their storytelling goals, and perhaps more importantly, the surprising amount of overlap between them.
I remember how it felt to take that throne. All that it meant. And all that it did not. A god of war. God of pain. Of suffering. Of destruction. And Owen said I chase redemption that I know I can never deserve. What does that make me? God of fools. A god of...
This video assumes you know OMORI's story, but those in the dark about God of War need not worry, as I'll give you the cliff notes here. It's interesting, don't worry. Okay, so, basically, Kratos was a Spartan captain who struck a pact with the then God of War Ares to turn the tide of battle against some attacking barbarians. He did this hoping it'd save his life and secure victory, which it did, but it came at an incalculable cost. In his rage from his newfound powers, Kratos accidentally killed his family. Their ashes fused to his skin, solidifying his nickname as the Ghost of Sparta. Feeling tricked, Kratos makes it his life's mission to gain revenge on Ares. And he does.
I was trying to make you a great warrior. You succeeded.
What do you know, there's an open position in the Court of Gods now, and Kratos takes up his new mantle as the God of War. Kratos heavily favors the Spartans for obvious reasons, with his god powers, which means he's fired. To make a very long story short, this culminates in Kratos vowing to kill Zeus, which he does. But not before dismantling the entirety of Olympus, from the god of the underworld to his own sibling, and the cast of Mortal Kombat 9. God of War's story was far from a boring one, but it also wasn't a particularly sophisticated one. Characters had screen presence, they had weight, power, spectacle, and I love it for that, but calling it deep is a stretch. All of that changed in 2018 when a bold new direction was envisioned for the franchise that changed Kratos from the arguably one-note godslayer to a remorseful and sophisticated father figure trying to leave his past behind for his new family. The cutscenes in this game are so well performed that they match the intensity of the god executions in the previous games, despite how small the moments might seem. Obviously, such bold changes were a risky decision for the franchise to make, but it ultimately gave the story a lot more to chew on. Seeing Kratos process the events from older games, and the switch from hack and slash to closer, more personal combat, gave the series new legs. Years later, we see quiet, more reserved Kratos, his trail of blood behind him, as he starts a new chapter of his life in the Norse realm. Hijinks ensue. With this knowledge, you are now equipped to understand the rest of this video. Sit back and enjoy. Arcs aren't the only thing Kratos and Sunny have in common. Both seldom speak, only doing so when absolutely necessary. There's something so unrelentingly strong about the quiet character. When a person as stoic as Kratos shifts, even slightly for something, it means so much. Provided you defeat the hardest enemy in God of War 2018, there's this small interaction between Kratos and his friend Mimir.
I'm grateful we were able to set the Valkyries free. But so much of this could have been avoided, if only...
You said it yourself, Ed. It does not matter anymore. The past is the past.
Well, that's awfully cheerful coming from you.
I am in a good mood. The dwarves will make use of this help.
Your dad's a wee bit single-minded, isn't he, lad?
Definitely.
Seriously, this seems small, but if you've been following the series, you know how insane this actually is. The gruff, reserved god of war saying he's in a good mood is so strangely moving. It reminds me of finally getting approval from a parental figure.
And he was not an easy man to make proud. If you were one of the lucky few who reached that peak, even for a moment, if you made him proud, wow, what a feeling.
This character is so hard on his son. He's seen turmoil, constantly wrestled with his demons and awful decisions. This brief moment of respite is such a welcome breath of fresh air. It's hard not to feel something powerful. Sonny's resilience and reservation stands in such stark contrast, it is hard to believe he and Kratos have this in common when briefly glancing at both of their stories. Save for player-chosen dialogue, OMORI's protagonist doesn't utter a single phrase until the game's final confrontation. Compared to the God of War, his quiet demeanor is often played comically, as shown in the photo book and manga. Yet there's other times where that same silence comes off as eerie, creepy, or even demented. When Sonny gets in a fight with Aubrey using the knife in the real world, it immediately makes everything charming about his silence vanish, yet it doesn't feel out of place. This range isn't something that most silent RPG protagonists have. A lot of this is achieved through the game's unique setting. As I've discussed in my Yumaniki video, dream settings have a ton of potential in that the world automatically revolves around the main character. Does Sonny ever say out loud that he thinks the Maverick is a doofus? No, but in Headspace the Maverick is an actual ape. Things like this are the norm, not the exception in Omori. Silence builds power. It creates a standard that, when broken, gives the viewer or player a feeling of awe, especially when they have another character to play off of. It extrapolates so much from them. Kratos teaching his son how to wield a bow isn't a problem you can solve through killing gods. A careful, measured hand is required. In multiple instances, you can see Kratos repressing his anger, trying to turn it off to help Atreus. Reflective characters are very important for quiet characters, as I mentioned. In this category, God of War definitely has the upper hand. His relationship with Atreus is so multi-layered and nuanced, it should be studied and taught on how to develop a bond between two characters. They play off each other so well, with both bringing out parts of the other they'd have never found on their own, like Kratos learning a new language, or Atreus learning to close his heart to his enemies. Omori is less intricate. It can occasionally feel like Sonny is simply the vessel through which the story progresses. That's not to say he's a bad character or we don't get interesting glimpses into who he is, but the interactions in the faraway scenes in particular lack the sophistication of the father-son dynamic in God of War. Kel does a lot of the heavy lifting here, taking Sonny to various places and often saying what's on his mind out loud, but it's hard not to feel like the game is leaning too heavily on Kel's outspokenness. Put another way, Sonny just doesn't contribute much in a lot of these scenes, and his reflective character doesn't bring out much of him. Lots of this doesn't really matter in the end, since much of the intrigue from these real-world segments is the player slowly discovering everyone's situation outside of Headspace. These are the natural flaws that come with the character Omocat chose to create. Giving Sonny dialogue could have given us great moments for sure, but it would have broke the mystique of the character, and his refusal to speak makes the final scene that much more cathartic. It's how he moves on from his past after all. Speaking of pasts, the Ghost of Sparta has an infamous reputation, spread through the 9 realms and beyond. Many gods and mortals are familiar with the notorious Kratos. His past is literally smeared across his body. Conversely, Sonny's past is almost completely out of sight and internal. Hell, he made an entire world out of cope. We don't even figure out what he did until practically the end of the game. Him working up to the confession is arguably the game. The secret makes multiple playthroughs that much more intriguing because we get to see everything from a new perspective. Both methods work perfectly for their respective games. I'll ruminate more on how knowing one character's past versus not knowing the others is interesting later in the chapter, but for now I want to turn your attention to one of my favorite comparisons between the two games. Provided you beat God of War Ragnarok's DLC, there's an amazing scene where Kratos encounters his old self in Valhalla. Sitting atop his old throne almost like an open wound, Kratos is disgusted by what he sees, giving a poignant monologue about how he hopes he can be different from the monster sitting in front of him. He reconciles, explaining that while his old self was a brutish monster, it wasn't the whole story. There was more to him. There was always more than what others saw. Kratos did horrific things, but he worked within the knowledge and emotional framework he had at the time. That's not to excuse what he's he's done, only to understand it, to accept it. With that, the old Kratos vanishes, allowing him to sit atop the throne again, not as a bloodthirsty leader looking for any and all excuses to unleash his fury, but as a benevolent leader taking his throne from his old self for all the right reasons. The throne scene in OMORI could not be more different. It represents Sonny completely caving, giving into OMORI's suppression of pain, denying himself the catharsis of telling the truth, accepting that even if it hurts to carry this burden, it is preferable to seeing how his friends would treat him, whereas Kratos finds peace of mind finally sitting atop his throne. For Sonny, it is his destruction. Thrones are kind of magnets for symbolism. Drogon melts the Iron Throne in Game of Thrones purely on account of what it represents. Anyone who sits on a throne has to be important, so substituting it for an idea or emotion is just kind of a neat idea. I should also point out that for all intensive purposes, Kratos' throne room is in Valhalla, which in-game is basically Kratos' headspace, making these scenes even more similar. What can someone learn from playing both games? Is there a new perspective that can be gained that you wouldn't get from just playing one of them? I think the answer to that question is best tackled from a storyteller's perspective. God of War and OMORI as a duology demonstrate the amazing range this story theme of self-forgiveness has. When we know the character's past from the start, we understand the stakes. We understand what the character will likely have to eventually tell some of the cast. This allows the writers to slowly build that character's confession up, perhaps even letting them dole the information out in smaller segments, leading to multiple powerful scenes. Kratos doesn't tell Atreus that he's destroyed the entire Greek pantheon right away, or anything, but he drops important tidbits leading up to it. OMORI's late-game rug pull is powerful stuff, but as a consequence of leaving us in the dark, there are moments where it can feel like we're simply meandering around headspace, not doing anything particularly relevant, especially on a first playthrough. The game is so concerned with withholding information, there are times where it can feel as if there's not much to progress. Yet that reveal is so gut-wrenching it can almost be forgiven in hindsight. Outside of a storyteller's perspective, I think there are practical reasons to experience both these games. As I briefly touched on earlier, it's amazing seeing the way a AAA studio and an indie developer mold this kind of story differently. God of War's talented mocapped actors and nuanced writing make even the smallest scenes feel uncomfortably personal and profound, whereas OMORI has to rely purely on its writing and character work, trying its best to get you invested even when everyone is isometric, retro-styled sprites. The most important thing, though, is that both Sonny and Kratos, despite the odds, despite everything they both did, were able to grapple with their demons in their own ways, and find something very elusive. Peace.
You lost everything and everyone. You became... There is no forgiving you. You chose! I chose. But now, should I, this same man, should I sit, take, proclaim, lead, place myself in service? In service? Should I lose everything and everyone? There's to be enough left inside so that I do not become you. I do not know. But I have hope. You are cruel and arrogant and selfish. But you are more than that. You have always been more than what others saw. You are more than that.
like I missed everything. Did you find what you needed? Glad to hear it, brother. We're done here then, so, what now?
Now, I believe I would like to sit here for a while.